something that we should all take on board. When you see or hear something that you feel is wrong, don't sit and complain among yourselves. Do something about it. I wonder how many of you have seen or let your children watch the Disney cartoon Aladdin. It's something I remember watching as a kid, and I often wonder if this was responsible for putting into my mind that Islam was a violent religion which promoted the subjugation and oppression of people. And I say that because watching a cartoon, watching film, it's all part of the media. And the film Aladdin opens up with the main character saying to the audience, i.e. the people who are watching it on TV or film, I come from a land, a faraway place, where they cut off your nose if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home. That was the opener to Aladdin, a cartoon watched by millions around the world, and just those words plants an idea, a toxic seed, into the minds of the very young who are watching it. So, you know, media can come from all angles. And just before I got on the plane to come to Australia, there's a magazine called The Spectator, and it had a vile cartoon on its front cover reflecting an ongoing debate about Islamic education in Britain. And this cartoon portrayed a young Muslim boy holding a giant copy of the Holy Quran in his right hand, and in his left hand a giant sword, and the headline was "Taught to Hate." Absolutely outrageous, but this is, and I'm hoping that the editor of The Spectator will make an apology. I'm not going to hold my breath, but there is a sea of change now, and Muslims are no longer prepared to sit back, and they are challenging, just like we saw from the Dr. Zakaria. One of the most gifted political cartoonists I've ever met reminded me about the power of such work a couple of years ago, saying it could be used as a force for good as well as evil. And after seeing the repulsive front cover of The Spectator that I told you about, I was reminded of my meeting with a man called Leon Kuhn. We had originally met at a rally in Trafalgar Square in London to protest about the vile cartoons designed to ridicule the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and insult millions of Muslims around the world. He dismissed the cartoons on several levels, from the point of quality and content, remarking that they were poorly drawn and of low quality and not at all satirical or even funny. Then he began telling me about how his grandparents had perished in the Holocaust. But before that happened, the persecution of the Jewish people across Europe had started much, much earlier, long before Hitler came to power. And what people forget, you know, Hitler was initially democratically elected. He then warned me that unless the Muslim community began to stand up for itself and challenge misconceptions by the enemies of Islam, Muslims could end up, he said, being dragged down the same street as his grandparents and millions of other Jews in the 1930s. And he said, Yvonne, you're nowhere near there yet, but the demonization of European Jews began in newspapers through the use of cartoons depicting Jewish people as subversives. I remember being shown a cartoon of a rabbi with grenades hidden in his ringlets. If you notice one of these cartoons, and he was referring to the Danish ones, he said one shows the prophet with a bomb secreted in his turban. And he said this is exactly the same style, the same message, and the same targeting of people for their faith as the Jewish people endured in the 30s. Sadly, Leon died towards the end of last year. And as the tributes poured in, I learned that he was born in London, the son of a property developer who was brought to Britain on a train with about 10,000 other Jewish children, and they were called the Kinder Transport Children. There's a moving statue at Liverpool Street Station in London depicting the evacuation of the Kinder children. And I was reminded of that statue because I took a remarkable Jewish woman, she's 90 this year, Haje Epstein, and she made that journey more than 70 years ago as one of the children. Her parents perished in the Holocaust. Haje, who's a tireless fighter for Palestine, also commented on the plight of Muslims living in Britain, and she said pretty much the same, that they were being targeted in the same way as Jewish people were targeted in Europe in the 30s. This sad journey down memory lane was triggered by this front cover on the Spectator with the blaring headline, "Talk to Hate." That front cover was divisive, inflammatory, and I can almost hear Leon Kuhn shaking his head and sighing in dismay. I do genuinely think that the editor, Fraser Nelson, will come up with some sort of an apology, because the signs were just starting, people were starting to challenge and vent outrage. But at the same time that front cover came out, elsewhere in Europe, a German newspaper, which I won't even attempt to pronounce its name, did something equally vile by publishing a cartoon depicting the Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, and they had him depicted as an octopus controlling the world. The cartoon was published in response to the announcement that Facebook had purchased WhatsApp, and the cartoon depicted the 29-year-old Zuckerberg as a hooked-nosed, fleshy-lipped, curly-haired individual imitating the very features ascribed to Jewish people in the Nazi cartoons more than 70 years ago. This cartoon last week was starkly reminiscent of the anti-Semitic Nazi-era cartoons, said Ephraim Zuroff from the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and he was furious and saying that this was absolutely disgusting, and he said in real life Zuckerberg didn't have a prominent or hooked nose, and he said the nefarious Jew octopus was a caricature deployed by the Nazis that was pretty much used as a staple by the Nazis in terms of their hateful campaign against the Jews in the 1930s. An exaggerated Jewish nose removes any question if this was unconscious anti-Semitism, said Rabbi Abraham Cooper, also from the Simon Wiesenthal Center. The cartoonist in this case has since apologized for the offense, and he said that anti-racism and anti-Semitism are ideologies which were totally against his ideals, and he said the last thing he wanted to do was to defame people because of their nationality, religious view or origin. But that is exactly what he did with the Zuckerberg cartoon, and that is exactly what the Spectator magazine has done an equivalent with its depicting a Muslim schoolboy with the headline "Taught to Hate." By Monday, the German newspaper took to the social networks, sending out all sorts of grovelling apologies, and the cartoon has now been redrawn and just shows a blank rectangular hole instead of Zuckerberg's face. That's because our cousins from the Jewish community refuse to take anything that is remotely vague, anything that borders on anti-Semitism. They challenge it straight away, which again brings me back to congratulating Dr. Zacharias' organisation for doing exactly that. It is something that I would certainly like to see done in the British Muslim community, and something which, there are various movements, but nothing organised in one concerted effort. So it's very good that you're doing that already here. But I do remember that the Spectator earlier this year raised eyebrows with a cover depicting caricatures of warring Sunni and Shia Arabs with enlarged, exaggerated noses and beards and weapons. Many felt that was both anti-Semitic, Islamophobic and racist. So with enough pressure put on the Spectator, we'll see if there is going to be a U-turn or an apology. But in the British media, certainly after the events of 9/11, Islam became the new face of the public enemy, and Muslims were, whether they were young or old, man, woman or child, have become targets of physical and verbal abuse as a direct result of the negative media that has been portrayed in the Muslim community. None of it is justified, and the demonisation of one set of people singled out for their faith has not happened since the 1930s, when the Jewish people were targeted in an unjustified manner. We know where that ended, and as Leon Kuhn said to me, you are not in that same street yet, but we are being dragged in that direction, and we must stand firm, and we must challenge lies, myths, and the demonisation of ourselves, our great faith, our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It is incumbent on all of us to come together and challenge. And we can do this individually or collectively behind such organisations that we've heard about, or even individually. If you have access to the social networks, there's no reason why you can't start Twitter and Facebook campaigns. If you see something that is wholly incorrect in a newspaper, there's no reason why you can't send an email to the editor. Individually, one email might not have an impact, but if half of this room sent in an email, the editor will certainly get to know that there's something going on, and they may review the situation. Whatever we do, we must not remain silent. I came to Australia a few years ago, and the organisers of an event then had taken the decision that the best way to deal with the media, because they were being hostile, was to ignore them. That is the worst thing you can do. Don't ignore the media. They can be difficult to work with. They can be really obnoxious and hateful, but if you run the other way, they will chase you. If you hide, they will find you. The best way is to stand your ground and use reasonable arguments to combat their skewed views of the Muslim community. We're all ambassadors of our faith, and if we put forward a good, coherent argument, who knows, we might even get some good headlines. Thank you very much.